Tense Senate showdown. Freeland faces heat as chair demands clarity and conservatives press hard. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland appeared before the Canadian Senate for what quickly became a high-stakes political battle over the federal government's push to eliminate barriers between provinces through the proposed Free Trade and Labour Mobility in Canada Act. The legislation, known widely as Bill C-5, is being championed as a solution to Canada's economic stagnation, but the Senate hearing exposed just how divided the political landscape remains in the wake of the 2025 snap federal election. With the cameras rolling, Freeland's lengthy explanations and passionate defenses clashed with a Senate increasingly demanding clarity, precision, and respect for regional voices. From the outset, Freeland framed Bill C-5 as a common-sense reform, arguing that harmonizing federal and provincial standards would create jobs, accelerate infrastructure, and cut through the bureaucratic gridlock strangling productivity. She used practical examples, like land surveyors being required to carry both federal and provincial certifications for the same project, to highlight inefficiencies she said are costing Canada billions. But as her answers grew longer and more detailed, senators from across the aisle, particularly conservatives, began pressing for more direct responses, with one chair politely interrupting to remind her that many colleagues still had questions to ask. Freeland acknowledged that some federal standards would remain necessary, particularly in areas such as national security or tobacco regulation. However, she argued that most of the internal trade barriers were not imposed out of malice, but rather the result of layers of well-meaning legislation that have piled up over decades. She called it a thicket of red tape that now acts as a self-imposed drag on Canada's economy. The message she repeated throughout was clear. The federal government is ready to step back and let provinces lead where they're already doing the job well. In one relatable anecdote, Freeland spoke of buying a new washing machine during the COVID pandemic, only to discover it needed to comply with both Ontario and federal energy efficiency standards. She suggested that such duplication makes little sense, especially when the vast majority of appliances are imported from outside Canada. Letting provincial standards stand alone in such cases, she argued, would ease access for consumers and lower costs, while still ensuring environmental goals are met. This example was met with mixed reactions, with some senators nodding in agreement and others expressing concern over how far such deregulation would go. The economic argument behind Bill C-5 is bold. Freeland cited studies suggesting that eliminating interprovincial trade barriers could add between 2 to 4% to Canada's GDP and increase worth up to $200 billion. She compared current internal barriers to a 7% tariff that Canadians effectively impose on one another. Her tone turned urgent, stressing that these changes must come now if Canada wants to compete globally. But she also emphasized that federal action alone would not be enough. Many of these barriers are controlled by the provinces, and she gave credit to those who've already begun reforming their own systems. But this Senate appearance was not just about policy, it was also about political accountability. Conservative senators turned the spotlight on the government's recent legislative history, particularly Bill C-69, which the Supreme Court ruled largely unconstitutional. They accused the Liberals of undermining democratic process by hiding revised versions of controversial legislation inside budget bills and now attempting to pass Bill C-5 as a backdoor power grab. The criticism was sharp. If this government had misused legislation once, could Canadians trust them not to do it again under the cover of national interest? Freeland did not shy away from these accusations. She insisted Bill C-5 had wide support, even among Conservative MPs in the House of Commons, and pointed to the need for urgent infrastructure investment as a national priority. She framed the bill not as a political maneuver, but as a necessary tool to help get things built faster and more efficiently across the country. This, she argued, was the time for all parliamentarians to set aside partisanship and act in the best interest of Canadian workers, families, and businesses. Still, representation remained a thorny issue. When questioned about the lack of a full cabinet minister representing Saskatchewan, Freeland responded by pointing to Minister of State Buckley Belanger. Though not a full cabinet minister, she said Belanger frequently participates in discussions and represents his province's interests. She also praised Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, calling him a pragmatic and cooperative partner on federal provincial matters. Yet, the concern lingered. Without a full seat at the cabinet table, who really speaks for Saskatchewan on decisions that affect its economy and sovereignty? Outside the chamber, reactions to the hearing were polarized. Supporters saw Freeland's performance as firm, passionate, and transparent. Detractors said she dodged hard questions and filibustered with anecdotes. Social media lit up with commentary, with some critics sarcastically suggesting she'd found Melanie Joly's stash, given how long she spoke without pause. The humor underscored a growing public frustration with politicians who appear more interested in control than conversation. But it also revealed how deeply polarized the debate around federal powers and economic reform has become. The larger issue lurking behind Bill C-5 is one of trust, both in the federal government and in its ability to respect provincial authority. Critics worry the bill could allow Ottawa to bypass legal challenges by invoking the national interest as a catch-all justification. That clause, they argue, could be abused by future governments to override environmental protections, Indigenous consultations, or regional planning laws. Freeland, however, repeatedly insisted that the legislation is not about centralizing power but about unlocking stalled projects and empowering provinces through recognition, not interference. In the end, this Senate clash was about more than one bill. It laid bare the fault lines between a federal government desperate to show results in a post-election landscape and an opposition that believes democratic processes are being sacrificed in the name of expediency. With Prime Minister Mark Carney still solidifying his leadership after April's snap election victory, Freeland's performance was as much a test of political messaging as it was of policy substance. She walked a tightrope, seeking to appear cooperative without ceding control, visionary without sounding dismissive. Whether Bill C-5 will ultimately be a game-changer for Canada's economy or a future legal and political minefield remains to be seen. What's clear is that Chrystia Freeland's Senate appearance has reignited deep debates about transparency, federalism, and the true cost of cutting corners. For now, the legislation advances. But the tension in that chamber was more than procedural. It was a reflection of a country wrestling with how to move forward together without leaving trust and accountability behind.